This quiet county park in southwestern Minnesota may be the most layered mile of trail I have ever walked. Beneath this valley lies some of the oldest exposed rock on planet Earth, stone that formed about 3.5 billion years ago. Around me is a valley carved by a river so enormous that geologists gave it its own name, even though it vanished thousands of years before the first pyramids were built. And hidden in the grass along this creek are the last traces of a town of 500 people that once governed an entire county and then disappeared. This is Beaver Falls County Park near Morton, Minnesota. Let us walk it together. We are in Renville County, in the valley of the Minnesota River, in the farm country of southwestern Minnesota. The Minnesota River runs a long diagonal across the state before it joins the Mississippi at the Twin Cities. The park sits on Beaver Creek, a small stream that drops out of the prairie to meet the big river near the town of Morton. Redwood Falls lies a few miles away on the other side of the valley, and the lands of the lower Sioux Indian community are just across the river. Out here the prairie is flat for miles, and then suddenly the ground falls away into this deep green corridor. Beaver Falls County Park is a rustic place, and that is exactly its charm. The park is divided into two parts, a recreation area along Beaver Creek and a horse camp folded into the wooded ravines. Between them there are about 20 rustic campsites, along with shelters, fire pits, and a network of multi-use trails shared by hikers, bikers, and riders on horseback. It is the middle of October. The campgrounds are nearly empty, and I have these trails almost entirely to myself. The only sounds are the creek, the wind, and the leaves coming down. The first mystery of this landscape is the valley itself, because it is far too big for the river inside it. The Minnesota River Valley was carved at the end of the last ice age by a torrent that geologists call Glacial River Warren. When the great ice sheet melted back, floods of meltwater tore through here with a force no river in Minnesota comes close to today. River Warren cut a channel miles wide and more than 200 feet deep in places, straight across the state. The modern Minnesota River is a quiet survivor wandering across the floor of a giant's riverbed. You can feel that story in your legs on this hike. The trail drops from the prairie rim down toward the creek, and the valley walls rise around you like the sides of a bowl. Every bluff you see was cut by that ancient flood, not by the modest river that flows here now. Geologists call the Minnesota an underfit river, a small stream living in a channel made by a monster. Walking down into it feels like climbing into the footprint of something that left long ago. So where did all that water come from? The answer is Glacial Lake Agassiz, an immense meltwater lake that pooled against the shrinking ice sheet over parts of Minnesota, North Dakota, and Canada. At its various stages, Agassiz covered more than 110,000 square miles, an area larger than all 5 Great Lakes combined, and reached depths of 600 or 700 feet. Roughly 13,500 years ago, the lake rose until it spilled over a ridge of glacial debris at Browns Valley, on the edge of Minnesota. That overflow became River Warren, and for thousands of years it drained one of the largest lakes the continent has ever held, right through this valley. Down on the valley floor, the trail runs beside Beaver Creek, and the creek is busy this afternoon. It slides over gravel bars, pools under cut banks, and hurries around fallen cottonwood limbs. Streams like this one formed as the land drained toward the deep valley that River Warren left behind. It is a small stream with a very long commute through time. Every bend in it is undoing, grain by grain, work the Ice Age started. Near its mouth, Beaver Creek steps down over ledges of ancient bedrock, and those falls gave the vanished town of Beaver Falls its name. The creek itself carries an older name in translation. The Dakota called this stream after Chapa, the beaver, and the English name is simply that Dakota name carried over. Names like this are everywhere in Minnesota, a reminder of who named this country first. Even the word Minnesota comes from the Dakota language, describing the waters of this very river. Mid-October might be the perfect time to walk this park. The hardwood slopes have turned gold and rust, and every gust sends another shower of leaves across the trail. The ravines hold the low afternoon light in a way that makes the whole valley glow. Summer crowds are gone, the insects are gone, and the sight lines open up as the canopy thins. It is the kind of quiet that makes you notice the ground you are walking on, which in this valley is worth noticing. Because the ground here is famous, at least among geologists. Around Morton, the valley exposes outcrops of Morton gneiss, a banded rock of pink, gray, and black that is about 3.5 billion years old. That places it among the oldest exposed whole rocks anywhere on Earth. It began as a gray granite deep in the crust, and about 1 billion years later, a collision of crustal fragments cooked and folded it, injecting swirls of molten pink granite. The result looks like frozen smoke, or galaxies caught in stone. It is hard to hold a number like 3.5 billion in your head, so consider what the world was like when this rock formed. There were no plants, no animals, and no soil. Only young oceans, volcanoes, and single-celled life. Rocks that old survive in only a handful of places on the planet, in Minnesota and Michigan, in northwest Canada and Greenland, in Siberia, South Africa, and Australia. Almost everything else that existed then has been recycled by the restless crust. Here it simply sits in the valley, and a river flood 11,000 years ago swept it clean for us to see. People did more than admire this stone. They went to work on it. Quarries opened at Morton, and the ancient gneiss was cut, hoisted, and shipped out as a building stone. When the rock is sawed and polished, its bands and swirls of black, pink, and gray emerge with white flecks, and the trade gave it a better name than geology did. They called it rainbow granite. A stone that formed before there was life on land ended up priced by the slab and loaded onto rail cars. Along stretches of this walk, you can see why the stone tempted the quarrymen. The creek has scoured down toward hard rock, and the land has a bony, muscular feel beneath its thin coat of woods. It is strange to run your hand over a boulder here and realize it may be older than the continents as we know them. Most trails let you walk through a landscape. This one lets you walk across most of the history of the Earth. Polished Morton gneiss traveled far from this valley. It faces the Adler Planetarium in Chicago and a landmark office tower in downtown Minneapolis, and fountains outside the White House were made from this rock. Across the country, people walk past pieces of this Minnesota valley every day without knowing it. There is something wonderful in that, a 3.5 billion-year-old rock holding up the polished corners of the modern world. The oldest thing most Americans will ever touch may be a lobby wall that started here. But stone and floodwater are only the deep layers of this place. The human story of this valley is just as dramatic, and much of it happened within a few miles of this trail. Long before there was a park here, before there was a Minnesota, this valley was a homeland. The trail we are walking crosses ground that has been lived on, fought over, founded, and abandoned. The rest of this hike walks through those stories. The Minnesota River Valley is the homeland of the Dakota people, who lived along these waters for generations before European settlement. The river and its wooded valley offered shelter, game, fish, and travel routes through the open prairie. Dakota names still cover this map, from Chapa on this creek to the name of the state itself. This was not empty country waiting to be discovered. It was a known and named world, and the valley we are hiking was part of its heart. I think about that as the trail follows the creek, that every feature here has carried more than one name. The water, the falls, the valley, all of them spoke Dakota long before they spoke English. A place like this park holds all of those names at once, even when only one appears on the sign. Walking here respectfully means remembering that the story did not start in 1866 with a town plat. It started much earlier, with the people whose descendants still live just across the river. In 1851, under heavy pressure, Dakota leaders signed the Treaties of Traverse des Sioux and Mendota, ceding most of southern Minnesota to the United States. The Dakota were left a reservation strip along the Minnesota River, about 70 miles long and 20 miles wide. In 1853, the government opened the Lower Sioux Agency, an administrative center meant to turn Dakota hunters into farmers, just a few miles from where we are walking. Promised payments for the land came late, or came thinned by traders' claims. The treaties reshaped this valley, and the grievances they created would soon reshape it again. This stretch of the Minnesota River Valley is astonishingly dense with that history. The Lower Sioux Agency, Fort Ridgely, and the Birch Coulee battlefield all sit within a short drive of this park. On the same October day as this hike, I also walked trails at Fort Ridgely across the river. You cannot spend an afternoon here without brushing against the events of 1862. So let us tell that story carefully, because it deserves care. By the summer of 1862, the Dakota on the reservation were in crisis. Annuity payments promised by the treaties were late, crops had failed, families were hungry, and some traders refused further credit. In August of that year, war began at the Lower Sioux Agency, a few miles from this trail, and fighting spread along the length of this valley. It lasted about 6 weeks, and it devastated Dakota and settler communities alike. The United States-Dakota War of 1862 remains one of the most painful chapters in Minnesota history, and this quiet valley was its center. Two miles north of Morton lies the site of the longest battle of that war. In early September 1862, a burial detail of about 170 soldiers and civilians under Major Joseph R. Brown camped near Birch Coulee Creek. Before dawn on September 2nd, about 200 Dakota soldiers surrounded the camp, and for more than 30 hours they pinned the detail down on the open prairie. 13 of the soldiers were killed and nearly 50 wounded, with some 90 horses lost, making it the costliest defeat United States forces suffered in the war. The siege ended only when a relief column under Henry Sibley arrived with artillery, and the battlefield is preserved today as a state historic site. The aftermath of the war fell hardest on the Dakota people. In December of 1862, 38 Dakota men were hanged at Mankato in the largest mass execution in United States history. Congress nullified the treaties, and most Dakota people were forced out of Minnesota into exile, imprisonment, or flight. Families were separated from this valley that had always been home. Any honest walk through this landscape has to carry that knowledge along with the beauty. And yet the Dakota story here did not end, because the Dakota are still here. Today, the Lower Sioux Indian Community, a federally recognized Dakota tribal nation, occupies lands on the south side of the Minnesota River, about 2 miles from Morton. The community counts roughly 930 enrolled members, and it is grounded in Dakota culture, language, and tradition. Just across the water from this park, a sovereign nation is raising its children in the valley its ancestors named. That presence is not a historical footnote. It is the living continuation of the oldest human story on this land. So this small park asks you to hold several truths at once. A homeland and a battlefield, ancient stone and vanished floods, grief and endurance, all folded into one green valley. That is a lot for a quiet county park with 20 campsites. But I find that trails like this one are where history feels most honest, out in the open air where it happened. And the park has one more story to tell, about the town that used to stand exactly where we are walking. In July of 1866, just 4 years after the war, a village called Beaver Falls was platted here beside the falls of Beaver Creek. That same November, Renville County completed its organization, and Beaver Falls became the county seat. The village grew to about 500 people, with the courthouse and the businesses that came with running a county. It was formally incorporated in 1890. For a generation, this little valley town was the center of official life for the whole surrounding prairie. which means that some of the ground this trail crosses used to be streets. People here once collected the mail, argued cases at the courthouse, and watched the creek rise in spring floods. Standing in the empty park today, it takes real effort to imagine wagon traffic and storefronts. The valley has folded the town back into grass and trees almost completely. Places like this are a good reminder that a map is just a snapshot, and towns can be as mortal as people. Beaver Falls had a problem, and the problem was geography. The railroads ran across the flat prairie above the valley, and rail towns like Olivia grew fast while the valley town sat below the rim. Beginning in the 1880s, Olivia pressed to take the county seat, and the first removal election came in 1889. The fight dragged on for years, as county seat wars usually did. In 1900, the question was finally settled, and the courthouse moved up to Olivia on the rail line. When the county seat left, the reason for the town left with it. The lawyers and officials followed the courthouse, the merchants followed the customers, and the railroad had never come down into the valley at all. It is the same story told across the American prairie, where the rails and the county records decided which towns lived. Beaver Falls had the waterfall and the history, but Olivia had the trains. Within a generation, the old county seat was fading toward the ghost town it would become. Through the early 20th century, Beaver Falls emptied out. Buildings were moved away, fell, or were taken down, and the Platte lines quietly returned to pasture and woods. Today, only remnants of the old village remain on the ground. Eventually, the old Townsite found a second life, when the county turned this stretch of the valley into Beaver Falls County Park. The town that once ran Renville County now serves it as a campground, which is either a sad ending or a peaceful one, depending on how you look at it. I choose to see it as peaceful, because the park did not erase Beaver Falls. It preserved the one thing that made the town possible, the valley itself. The creek still steps down over the ledges, the ravines still blaze in October, and anyone can walk here and stand where the county seat used to be. Most ghost towns are locked behind fences or plowed under. This one became a public place, which means its story is still being walked. Step back and look at what one small county park is holding. Rock from the morning of the earth, 3.5 billion years old, famous enough to face buildings in Chicago and Washington. A valley carved by the outflow of a lake bigger than all the Great Lakes combined. The homeland of the Dakota people, the scars of the 1862 war, and a living Dakota nation just across the river. And under the grass, a vanished county seat named for a waterfall on a creek named for the beaver. Few places stack this much time in a 2-mile walk. The light is getting long over the valley, and my loop along Beaver Creek is coming to its end. Beaver Falls County Park will never be famous, and honestly that is part of its magic. It is a quiet keeper of enormous stories, from the oldest rock on Earth to a town that vanished within living memory of some of its neighbors. If your travels ever take you along the Minnesota River, come down off the prairie and give this valley an afternoon. Thank you for watching. Follow for more of the trails of the world.